On a warm Saturday afternoon in June 1999, Central Park in New York City was its usual symphony of life. Saxophones playing near the Bethesda Terrace, children laughing by the carousel, rollerbladers weaving through couples holding hands. The Harper family, visiting from a quiet town in Vermont, had just arrived in the city 2 days earlier. It was meant to be the family's first big vacation since Emily, their youngest, had turned 9. That day, around 3 p.m., Emily was playing near the edge of Bethesda Fountain, tossing breadcrumbs to pigeons and circling the stone balustrade, her laughter occasionally floating back to her parents, who were sitting just a few meters away on a bench under the trees. Her mother was adjusting the strap of the camera while her father looked through a guidebook to plan their next stop. And then, in the blink of an eye, Emily was gone. At first they thought she had wandered to the playground nearby or had ducked behind a tree. Her father called out, then ran in widening circles. Her mother searched the bathrooms, the vendor carts, the carousel entrance. Within 20 minutes, park rangers had been alerted. Within 45, the NYPD was present with K-9 units. A helicopter was dispatched to scan from above. But as the crowds thinned and the sun dipped lower behind the skyline, no trace of Emily was found. No scream, no struggle, no belongings left behind. It was as if the park, or the city itself, had swallowed her whole. A missing persons alert went out before nightfall. Her picture was on the evening news within hours. And yet, despite the cameras, the search parties, and the hundreds of witnesses present that day, not a single credible lead emerged. In the weeks that followed, the Harper family remained in the city, refusing to return home without answers. Flyers bearing Emily's smiling face were plastered across Manhattan. News stations ran interviews with tearful parents. Police conducted over 300 interviews and cross-checked known offenders in the area. But every tip led to a dead end. As time passed, attention shifted. Other headlines took over. And the case, like too many, grew cold. But before you watch and try to understand this shocking case, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, your city and country, so we can see how far this story has reached. Because what happened to Emily Harper is not just a story of loss, it's a story of silence, secrets, and a single news report, 8 years later, that changed everything. In the months after Emily's disappearance, the Harper family transformed their grief into determination. They remained in New York well into the fall of 1999, refusing to let the trail go cold without a fight. Emily's mother, Diane, appeared on morning shows and news specials, pleading for information. Her father, Richard, walked the park daily, revisiting the spot near the fountain where he last saw his daughter, hoping to notice something, anything, he'd missed before. Hundreds of volunteers joined search efforts in and around the park. Tips came in from as far as New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and even Canada, but none led to Emily. What haunted investigators most was the complete absence of evidence. No dropped toy, no clothing, no eyewitness who could say they saw her leave the park. She had simply vanished in broad daylight, surrounded by thousands of people. It became one of the most baffling child disappearance cases in New York's recent history. By early 2000, with no leads and public interest fading, the case was quietly reclassified as inactive. The Harpers eventually returned to Vermont, reluctantly, carrying with them boxes of press clippings, police documents, and the few personal items they had brought for Emily on their trip. Her bedroom at home remained untouched. A poster of a ballerina on the wall, a stack of Goosebumps books on the nightstand, and a row of stuffed animals waiting for a child who never came back. Diane began writing letters to Emily in a journal, one entry each night. "Today would have been your 10th birthday. We made cupcakes. I saved one for you." The pain never softened. Richard grew quiet, withdrawn. Their marriage began to erode under the weight of unresolved grief. Still, Every June 12th, the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, they returned to Central Park. They brought flowers, candles, and a laminated photo of her smiling in a blue dress, the same one she wore that day. Locals began to recognize them. Some would stop and offer quiet condolences. Others avoided eye contact, as if acknowledging the pain might somehow make it real. Over time, Emily's case became one of those stories people in the city half remembered. Wasn't there a little girl who went missing in the park years ago? Then, in the spring of 2007, something changed. A journalism student at NYU named Clara Reyes was digging through old archives for a class project on unsolved crimes in the city. She stumbled across the original police report and news footage from 1999. Something about the lack of follow-up coverage struck her. She began to look deeper, interviewing retired officers, speaking to park vendors who still worked near the fountain, and reviewing old surveillance logs from buildings that surrounded the park. What she found in one of those interviews, a comment made offhandedly by a groundskeeper, would unlock a chain of events that would finally shake the case open. The man Clara Reyes spoke to was Arthur Bell, a now retired Central Park groundskeeper who had worked the south end of the park for nearly 35 years. He agreed to meet her in a small diner on the Upper West Side, where he brought a worn leather notebook and a hesitant demeanor. Over black coffee and a slice of cherry pie, he told Clara something he said he had tried to forget. On the afternoon of June 12, 1999, the day Emily disappeared, he had been working near a maintenance shed roughly 200 meters from Bethesda Fountain. Around 3:20 p.m., he noticed a man walking quickly along a service path not open to the public. He wasn't dressed like anyone I'd seen around the park, Arthur said. Wearing a beige cap, sunglasses, carrying a jacket in his arms like something was wrapped inside. At the time, Arthur didn't think much of it. It was a crowded day, and people often wandered into areas they weren't supposed to. But what stuck with him was that the man didn't look lost. He looked like he was trying not to be seen. Clara asked if he had reported this at the time. Arthur shook his head. I didn't connect the dots until later, when I saw the news that night. And by then, I figured if it was important, someone else would have said something. But no such description had ever made it into the police report. The lead had never been logged. Clara brought the interview transcript to the NYPD's cold case unit. At first, they were skeptical. Too much time had passed, too many false leads. But something about the groundskeeper's detailed memory, his consistency, and the timing of the sighting pushed the detectives to take another look. That's when they made a discovery that had gone unnoticed for 8 years. Archived footage from a nearby apartment building's rooftop security camera, filmed on VHS and thought too degraded to be useful, was enhanced with modern software. At exactly 3:23 p.m., a figure could be seen walking briskly along the restricted service path just east of the fountain. The resolution was poor, but the man's posture and clothing matched Arthur Bell's account. Beige cap, sunglasses, light jacket bundled in his arms. The footage was shaky, blurred, and lasted less than 15 seconds. But for the first time since 1999, there was a visual clue. News of the footage leaked to the press before the NYPD could issue an official statement. By the next morning, headlines flooded local stations. New evidence in Central Park girl's disappearance. The Harpers, stunned, were contacted by Clara personally. Diane cried when she heard the details. Richard simply asked, "Is she still out there?" The story, buried for 8 years, was back. And with it, a wave of new questions. Who was the man in the footage? What was he carrying? And why had this video been missed for nearly a decade? Following the resurfacing of the footage, the NYPD's cold case unit reopened Emily Harper's file in full. A new team was assigned, combining experienced detectives and digital forensic analysts. Their first goal: identify the man in the grainy video. Using crowdsourced footage, old park permits, and nearby building access logs, they began narrowing down possible suspects. Clara Reyes was invited to collaborate as a consultant. After all, she was the reason the case had come back to life. It was during her continued research that she uncovered something curious. A visitor's permit issued to a freelance photographer named Louis Brent, who had filed paperwork that very morning to shoot candid street scenes in the southern end of Central Park. The permit placed him in the general area at the exact time of Emily's disappearance. But what stood out was that Brent had never submitted any photos from that day. Unusual for someone who worked for quick turnaround tabloid publications. Detectives tracked him down to a small town in upstate New York. Now in his early 50s, Brent lived alone and rarely worked. When questioned, he claimed he left the park early that day due to rain, a detail that was factually incorrect, as weather records confirmed clear skies until late evening. More troubling, when asked if he remembered the Harper family or anything unusual, he deflected, saying he didn't pay attention to children. His alibi was shaky and his demeanor nervous. With a warrant, investigators searched his old apartment storage unit. What they found stunned everyone involved. Inside a sealed plastic tub were dozens of unprocessed film rolls, dated from 1997 to 2001. Many were damaged, degraded by time, but lab technicians managed to develop portions of them. Among shots of nature, buildings, and passerby, one strip stood out. A sequence of 4 photos showing Bethesda Fountain on the day of the disappearance. And in the third frame, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was a little girl in a blue dress, standing near the stone railing. The final photo in the sequence showed a man, partially turned, holding a bundled jacket, walking in the direction of the service path. The timestamp on the photo, 3:22 p.m. This new evidence linked Brent directly to the area, and for the first time connected an independent visual of the possible suspect to a known witness. Brent was taken into custody for further questioning. Under pressure, he admitted taking the photos but denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance. He insisted he didn't know the man in the picture and had discarded the roll because it was too blurry to sell. But no one was convinced. The Harpers were informed immediately. Diane stared at the printed image for minutes without speaking. "That's her," she whispered. "That's Emily. That's my baby." The investigation had finally found a crack, and behind it, something long buried was beginning to stir. As pressure mounted on Louis Brent, investigators intensified their efforts to trace the identity of the man seen in both the video footage and Brent's photographs. A forensic analyst compared body posture, estimated height, and gait patterns between the two visual sources, suggesting a strong likelihood that they were the same person. But without a clear facial image, the case still lacked the breakthrough it needed. That was when a retired park security supervisor, Gerald Banks, reached out after seeing the story resurface on television. He claimed to remember an unusual incident that occurred a few days after the disappearance, something that had bothered him for years, but that no one had taken seriously at the time. According to Banks, on the morning of June 15, 1999, just 3 days after Emily vanished, a man in a beige cap and sunglasses was seen on the southern service road of the park, arguing with another individual near a delivery van. "It stood out," Banks said, "because we just had a child go missing, and this guy was angry, saying something like, 'I told you I didn't sign up for this.'" The van was never identified or stopped, but Banks took down part of the license plate. For nearly 8 years, that scribbled number had sat in an old drawer in his garage. Now it became a vital lead. Police ran the partial plate through DMV archives. After weeks of cross-referencing commercial vehicles from the 1999 registry, they found a match: a van registered to a private courier service that had gone out of business in early 2000. One of the drivers listed on the old employee roster? A man named Martin Rivas. No known criminal record, but he had worked part-time for delivery companies across the tri-state area during the late 90s. His last known address was in Queens, but he'd since moved multiple times and hadn't filed taxes in over a decade. investigators tracked him down in a rural part of Pennsylvania. Now 48, Martin Rivas was living under the radar, working odd jobs and renting a room above an auto shop. When approached by detectives, he denied ever working in Central Park. But when shown a blurry frame from the surveillance footage, he froze. A slight shift in his expression, a flicker of recognition, was enough for police to request a search warrant. In his room, they found several newspaper clippings about Emily Harper's case, one folded neatly inside a manila envelope with the words, "They'll never know," scribbled in the corner. Back in Vermont, the Harpers received the news cautiously. After years of false hope, they had learned to hold their emotions tightly. But Diane couldn't help but ask the same question out loud. What if she's still alive? With Rivas in custody and Brent under scrutiny, the investigation finally had two persons of interest. One with physical evidence, the other with psychological tension boiling under the surface. And soon what began as a photo would unravel into a web far darker than anyone expected. The interrogation of Martin Rivas stretched over several days. At first, he was defensive, claiming he had never heard of Emily Harper, that the newspaper clippings were part of a college research project he never finished. But the story didn't hold. Forensic investigators had found fingerprints inside the envelope, on the clippings, and on an old keychain that had been hidden inside a sock drawer. A plastic charm shaped like a swan, nearly identical to one Emily's mother remembered buying for her at a gift shop near the park, just a day before she disappeared. Under increasing pressure, Rivas broke. Not with a full confession, but with fragments. "I didn't take her," he muttered. "I was told to watch her, just for a few hours. That's all it was supposed to be." When asked who had given the order, he clammed up again, shaking his head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Simultaneously, investigators re-examined the shuttered courier company Rivas had once worked for. It had been registered under a shell corporation, tied to several aliases and defunct addresses. Financial records were vague, and most of the company's former employees were either untraceable or denied knowing Rivas personally. But one name kept popping up: Gerald Quinn, a former logistics manager who had gone off the radar in 2001 after a fraud investigation in New Jersey. When police looked into Quinn's background, they discovered that he had also once worked as a security contractor and had filed temporary work papers with the city of New York in June 1999. His location? Central Park. His assignment? Event logistics for a private permit near Bethesda Terrace. The name had never appeared in the original Harper case file. Now, with Quinn identified as a potential third actor, a clearer picture began to emerge. Not of a random abduction, but of something orchestrated. Brent, the photographer, had captured the moment. Rivas, the courier, had watched over the girl. And Quinn, possibly, had coordinated the operation. But what kind of operation involved taking a child in broad daylight from one of the most crowded places in the world? FBI agents joined the case at this point, suspecting a network with far-reaching implications. They reviewed similar child disappearance reports from the late 1990s and early 2000s in other major cities. A pattern began to take shape. Mostly girls between 8 and 12, all taken in public spaces, all unsolved. Names that had long faded from headlines were suddenly back on case boards. And Emily Harper's case was now the thread pulling them all together. Meanwhile, Clara Reyes, now fully embedded in the task force as a research consultant, received an anonymous package at her apartment. No return address. Inside, a small cassette tape and a Polaroid photo. The picture was old, slightly faded, and showed a young girl in a dimly lit room holding what looked like a stuffed giraffe. Written on the back were 4 chilling words. "She called for Mom." Clara's hands shook as she brought the photo to the lead investigator. The cassette was sent for forensic recovery. If its contents matched the handwriting or voice of anyone in custody, or led them to where Emily had been taken, It could be the breakthrough they had waited 8 years for. The cassette tape was old, worn, with parts of the magnetic strip degraded from time and poor storage. But forensic audio technicians managed to salvage portions of the recording. What they recovered chilled everyone involved. The audio began with ambient static, then soft footsteps, followed by the faint sound of a child humming a song. A lullaby, off-key, almost whispered. Then came a voice, male, calm but deliberate, saying, "Stop crying, no one's coming. Just do as you're told." In the background, the voice of a young girl could be heard sobbing and repeating a name. "Mommy, Mommy." When the audio was played for Diane Harper, she clutched her husband's hand tightly. Her lips trembled. "That's Emily," she said, with conviction that no forensics could ever match. The Polaroid photo was sent for analysis. The lighting and furniture in the background were consistent with old storage units or basement facilities. A toy giraffe was visible in the girl's arms, the same one Emily had received on her 9th birthday. Enhancing the image further, specialists found a calendar partially visible on the wall. The month shown? September 2000. That meant Emily had still been alive more than a year after her disappearance. But where? And why had no one come forward with this information until now? The package had been dropped into a mailbox just outside Albany, New York. Surveillance footage of the post office didn't yield a clear identity, but investigators noted a pattern. Similar anonymous packages had been sent to families in cold cases in the past, one to a mother in Chicago, another to a couple in Baltimore. Both cases involved young girls, missing under mysterious circumstances. Both had gone cold, and both received anonymous clues that never led to a resolution. Until now, no one had connected them. But the handwriting on the back of the Polaroid matched those other letters. The same pen, the same slope. Someone was watching, and someone wanted these stories to be found, eventually. With this, the case officially shifted from a state cold file to a multi-state federal investigation. A task force was formed, centered on Emily's case, but expanding its reach to at least 6 others. Meanwhile, Martin Rivas remained in custody, but refused to say more. Brent had hired a lawyer and claimed the photos were just coincidence. And Gerald Quinn, the logistics manager, was still missing. Clara Reyes, now facing intense media attention, continued her own search. One night, while reviewing archived building permits around the park, she noticed something odd. A maintenance tunnel beneath Central Park West had been partially closed for renovations in 1999, right around the time of Emily's disappearance. The closure had only been recorded in handwritten ledgers, not in digital records. Could it be that someone had used the tunnel to move Emily without ever being seen? The answer, as investigators would soon find, lay not just in where Emily had been taken, but in how carefully every step of her vanishing had been planned. The tunnel beneath Central Park West had long been forgotten, a maintenance passage originally built in the 1940s for electrical and plumbing access beneath the surrounding museums and park infrastructure. Over the decades, it had fallen out of use, officially sealed off in the mid-1980s, with only handwritten logs referencing partial entries for inspections or utility work. But in July 1999, just a month after Emily's disappearance, a brief note appeared in one of the paper logs. Temporary access cleared for private contract, 2:05 p.m., South Tunnel Sector B. The name listed beside the entry? G. Quinn. With this connection, the FBI secured access to the tunnel, escorted by structural engineers and cadaver dogs. The air was thick with dust and decay. The metal door creaked open after decades untouched. Deep within the corridor, past rusted junction boxes and forgotten storage crates, they found something that should never have been there. A makeshift room constructed from plywood and insulation panels. Inside, a small mattress, a child's blanket, an old lamp, and faint drawings scrawled on the wall in crayon. A name appeared again and again. Emily, alongside stars, hearts, and a stick figure of a girl holding hands with two taller figures. One of them had no face. On the floor was a rusted tin lunchbox. Inside, still sealed, was a birthday card, faded but legible, signed in a child's handwriting. "To Mommy, from Emily. I miss you. Are you still looking?" Diane Harper collapsed when she read those words. Her daughter had not only been alive after the abduction, she had never stopped hoping. Forensics gathered every sample possible. DNA was extracted from the blanket, the walls, even a toothbrush found tucked behind a pipe. The results confirmed it. Emily Harper had been there, alive, isolated, and likely moved again not long after. The discovery shocked the country. News reports showed footage of the tunnel, calling it a hidden cell beneath Manhattan. Journalists swarmed the scene. Old suspects were re-examined. The public demanded answers. But still, no sign of Gerald Quinn, the man whose name had appeared on the permit and who was now considered the architect behind at least 3 confirmed disappearances. That week, another anonymous package arrived. This time, not to Clara Reyes or the Harper family, but to the FBI's field office in Manhattan. Inside, a VHS tape. Handwritten across the label were 5 haunting words: "She's not the only one." What the tape revealed would change everything the world thought it knew about Emily Harper's case, and expose a network far more sinister than anyone was ready to believe. The VHS tape arrived in a plain envelope with no fingerprints, no return address, and no accompanying note beyond the chilling label: "She's not the only one." FBI technicians carefully restored the tape and began playback in a secured viewing room. The footage, grainy and shaky, began with what appeared to be a basement or underground facility. The lighting was dim, the camera occasionally out of focus, and in the background, a fan buzzed with mechanical regularity. At first, the room was empty. Then a door creaked open, and a child stepped into frame. A girl around 10, with long dark hair, wearing a plain nightgown and holding a stuffed animal. Her eyes flicked toward the camera only briefly, but even in poor resolution, the fear was unmistakable. She wasn't Emily. But the timestamp on the footage was from 2001, and the location remained unknown. The video then cut to a second scene. This time, 2 children sitting on the floor, whispering to each other. One of them wore a friendship bracelet that Diane Harper later identified as one she and Emily had made together on their kitchen table just weeks before their trip to New York. The footage confirmed what had only been theorized until then. Multiple children had been taken, not just Emily, and the person filming them was not hiding anymore. He wanted someone to see. FBI analysts cross-referenced the faces with missing persons databases. Within hours, they confirmed 2 matches. One, a girl missing from Cleveland in 1997. The other, a child abducted from a Chicago playground in 2000. Both had been classified as likely deceased. But now, they were part of something bigger, something horrifyingly organized. The task force intensified its efforts. A joint operation with international agencies was launched to track former associates, travel records, and hidden properties linked to Gerald Quinn and his shell companies. One of those companies had owned a storage facility in rural Connecticut. The building had been inactive since 2003. When agents arrived, they found the interior abandoned, but in one corner, carved into a wooden wall, were the initials EH, and a single sentence scratched beneath them. They said you stopped looking. It was clear now. The abductions had been systematic. The movement of the children timed and calculated. Emily had not simply vanished. She had been taken, hidden, watched, and moved again by people who understood how to exploit the noise and chaos of a city. Clara Reyes, overwhelmed but resolute, compiled everything into a special investigative report titled "The Missing Ones: What Happened After Central Park." The documentary aired nationally and reignited public pressure for justice. Across the country, families of long-forgotten cases came forward with new information. Phone lines at the FBI's tip center were overwhelmed, and in the middle of it all, one question remained. Where was Emily Harper now? It was late autumn in 2007 when the breakthrough came. A tip, anonymous as most had been, pointed authorities toward an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Ithaca, New York. The property had been sold and resold through a web of shell buyers, but one name linked it, quietly, to the now infamous Gerald Quinn. Armed with a warrant, federal agents approached the house cautiously. It was nearly empty, abandoned for weeks. But in the basement, beneath a rusted hatch bolted to the floor, they discovered a hidden room. Inside there was no one. No children, no captors. Only silence, dust, and memories sealed in shadows. Yet in one corner, next to a small cot, they found a journal. Childlike handwriting, dated entries. One read, "I think I'm 16 now. I don't know what day it is, but I still dream about the fountain. I still remember the birds." The signature at the bottom, Emily H. The pages were filled with drawings, poems, and quiet questions. Did you stop looking? Will anyone find me? Am I real outside this room? It was proof that Emily had been alive, that she had survived far longer than anyone had dared to believe. But where she had gone, or been taken, after that, remained unknown. The discovery of the journal sent shockwaves through the media. Diane and Richard Harper, though devastated by the lack of closure, held the notebook in their hands like a fragile piece of their daughter's soul. "She wrote this," Diane whispered, flipping through the pages. She was still waiting. The room was preserved as evidence. DNA confirmed Emily had stayed there. But no fingerprints beyond hers were found. It was as if she had been left behind again. In the months that followed, Clara Rea's documentary won national awards. Her work had not only reignited Emily's case, it had exposed a network of disappearances that had long been buried beneath headlines and forgotten names. More cold cases were reopened. New arrests were made. Gerald Quinn remained at large, but his face was now one of the most recognized in America. The FBI placed him on their most wanted list. Tips continued to pour in. The Harper family created the Emily Foundation, focused on supporting families of long-term missing children and pushing for deeper cooperation between state and federal databases. Every June 12th, they returned to Central Park, not just with flowers, but with a gathering. Survivors, families, reporters, children holding signs that read, "Still looking." The memory of Emily Harper became a movement. And somewhere, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting, a girl once lost beneath the noise of a summer day in 1999 might know that her story wasn't forgotten, that she still mattered, that someone, somewhere, still believed she was out there. Because some disappearances fade into silence, but others, like Emily's, refuse to stay buried.